I was standing in my own kitchen, holding a check for $15,000, when my daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eyes and said, "That's a good start. Not thank you. Not I can't believe you did this for us, a good start." That was the moment I realized the woman my son had married didn't see a mother standing in front of her. She saw a bank account with a heartbeat. What happened next turned my entire family inside out, and the housewarming gift I gave with every ounce of love I had became the one mistake she could never take back. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button, because you do not want to miss what comes next. Let me tell you something about grief that nobody warns you about. It doesn't end. It doesn't arrive one morning and announce itself, take everything it came for, and then politely leave when it's finished. Grief moves in. It rearranges the furniture. It sits in your husband's chair at the kitchen table and drinks from his coffee mug and watches you from across the room like it's daring you to say something about it. My husband Robert passed away on a Tuesday morning in October, 5 years before any of this began. He'd gone to sleep the night before right there beside me, same as he had for 41 years, and when I reached over to wake him for breakfast, he was already gone. No warning, no dramatic final words, no chance to say the things we always assume we'll have time to say later. Just gone, and then it was just me. Me in the house we'd built together over 4 decades of a life that was never easy but was always ours. People always say the wrong things when someone dies. They say he's in a better place and time heals everything and you're so strong. Margaret, I don't know how you do it, and you nod, and you say thank you, and you go home and sit in the dark for a while because there is simply nothing else to do. But here is what I learned in those 5 years after Robert left. Strength isn't something that lives inside you like some kind of permanent flame. Strength is something you build brick by brick, bad day by bad day, one morning at a time, when you wake up and decide that today you are going to get out of bed and make your coffee and water your garden and keep going, not because it's easy, but because the alternative is unthinkable. I learned how to call a plumber. I learned how to balance a spreadsheet. I learned how to change a smoke detector battery, standing on a step stool at 11 o'clock at night, talking to myself the whole time, like Robert was still in the next room and could hear me complaining about it. I built a life. Not the life I had planned. Nobody plans for the life they end up with, but a good life. A quiet life. A life full of my garden and my books and my neighbors and my church friends and the small, steady routines that turn an ordinary day into something worth living. And I had my son Daniel. My Daniel, I need you to understand something before I go any further, because everything that happens in this story depends on you understanding this one thing. I loved my son completely, not the way parents love their children in fairy tales, not perfectly, not without conflict, not without the 1,000 small failures and misunderstandings that come with raising a human through all the jagged years of childhood and adolescence and early adulthood. We had our hard times. We had our disagreements. There were years when the phone calls were too short and the visits were too rare, and I would sit on the porch and wonder if I had done something wrong, if I had somehow failed to teach him the things a mother is supposed to teach. But he was mine and I was his. And when he called me to tell me that he and Samantha had finally, after 4 years of trying, managed to buy their first home, I cried. I stood in my kitchen and I pressed the phone to my ear and I cried like it was the best news I'd heard since I couldn't remember when. "Mom, you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. It's just a house." "Mom, it's not just a house. Don't you ever say that? It's never just a house." He laughed, and for a moment he sounded exactly like he had at 7 years old, this bright, open, uncomplicated laugh that used to make me feel like everything in the world was exactly the way it was supposed to be. I started planning the gift that same night. Now, I want to be very clear about something, because I think it matters. It matters more than I realized at the time. I did not have to give them money. Nobody asked me. Nobody suggested it. Nobody sat me down and made a case for why a housewarming gift of $15,000 was the appropriate amount. That number came entirely from me, from the part of me that had watched my son work hard for years and wanted to do something real for him, something that went beyond a casserole dish and a card. Robert and I had been careful people, methodical. We'd saved our whole lives not because we didn't know how to have fun, but because we believed truly and deeply that the greatest gift you could give your children was security. The knowledge that there was something solid behind them, that if things got hard there was a foundation. I had my retirement accounts. I had this house paid off, thank God, paid off 5 years before Robert died. I had my Social Security. I had a modest savings account that I kept liquid for emergencies, and yes, for exactly this kind of moment, $15,000 was not nothing. I want to be honest about that. It was not nothing. But it also wasn't going to change my life the way it might change theirs. So I wrote the check. I baked an apple pie, Robert's mother's recipe, the one I've been making since before Daniel was born, with the lattice top and the cinnamon sugar crust that fills the whole house with something that smells like home. I wrote a letter, a real letter, handwritten, on the good stationery I keep in the desk in the study. The cream-colored paper with the small blue flowers along the border that I've had for 20 years and only take out for the things that really matter. In that letter, I told them what I hoped for them. I told them about what home had meant to Robert and me, and what I prayed it would come to mean to them. I told them that this gift came with no strings, no expectations, no debt, that it was given freely and completely from the most genuine love I knew how to feel. I folded it carefully, I put it in an envelope, I put the envelope next to the check. I put both of them inside the pie box tied with a blue ribbon, and then I drove to their new house on a Saturday morning in September, with the windows down and the radio on and something light and hopeful moving through my chest, the way it does when you're about to do something for someone you love. I should have known then. I should have noticed, but hindsight, as they say, is a perfectly merciless teacher. Samantha answered the door. She was wearing a white linen blouse and her hair was pulled back, and she looked, I'll give her this, she looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. Samantha had that particular kind of polish that some women are born with and others spend years trying to acquire. Everything about her was precise, controlled carefully, deliberate. Presented Margaret. She opened her arms. You didn't have to come all the way out here. Of course I did. I brought pie. Oh, you are too sweet. She took the box from my hands, and I noticed even then, even before I had any reason to notice, that her eyes went to the box and stayed there a half second too long before she smiled at me. Daniel's out back. Come in, come in. The house was beautiful. I want to give credit where credit is due. They had done something genuinely lovely with the space. The walls were a warm, neutral color, the kind of cream that manages to feel both elegant and comfortable, and there were fresh flowers on the entryway table and light coming through the tall windows in the living room. It looked honestly more finished than I'd expected for a couple who had just moved in 3 weeks ago. You've been busy, I said. Oh, we went a little crazy with decorating. She laughed, a light, practiced sound. You know how it is when you finally have a place of your own. Daniel appeared from the hallway, and I felt that rush of warmth that I think never fully goes away when you see your child, no matter how old they get, no matter how much time has passed. He was 42 years old and he still looked like my boy. Mom, he hugged me and I held on a second longer than necessary. You didn't have to bring anything. I absolutely did. Sit down, open it together. We settled in the living room. Samantha set the box on the coffee table and pulled off the ribbon with a smile. She opened it and saw the pie first and said all the right things. Oh, this smells incredible and you are the absolute best, Margaret. And then she saw the envelope. She looked at Daniel. He looked at her. They opened it together, or rather, Samantha held it while Daniel leaned in to read, and I watched their faces as they got to the check. Daniel looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as undone. His eyes went bright and he shook his head slowly and said, Mom, you can't. And I did. This is too much. It's exactly the right amount. Don't argue with your mother. He came around the coffee table and hugged me again, and over his shoulder I watched Samantha. She was still looking at the check. Not at me, not at Daniel, at the check, and I saw her lips move, just barely, just the faintest shift, like she was doing math. I didn't understand what I was seeing in that moment. I filed it away in the place where we put the things we notice but aren't ready to examine yet, and I smiled, and I had a piece of pie, and I stayed for 2 hours and drove home feeling like I'd done something good. I had no idea that I had just handed Samantha Wilson the first number in a calculation she'd already started running. The second sign came 11 days later. I was sitting at my kitchen table going through some paperwork, routine things, the kind of administrative tedium that fills a life whether you want it to or not. Insurance documents, an update to my will that my attorney had sent over for review, a quarterly statement from the retirement account manager I'd worked with for 12 years. My phone rang. Samantha. I remember being pleasantly surprised. She and I had never been close in the way I'd hoped. She was cordial, always cordial, but there was always a careful distance there, a studied pleasantness that never quite softened into warmth. So when I saw her name on my screen, I answered with something that felt close to hope. Samantha, hi, what a nice surprise. Margaret, hi. I was just thinking about you and wanted to check in. How are you feeling? Oh, I'm fine, sweetheart, just doing some paperwork. On a Saturday, you work too hard. It's nothing exciting. Just the usual. And then so naturally that I almost didn't notice it happening. Nothing serious, I hope. Health stuff can be such a headache. No, just financial things, routine. Good. You're so organized, Margaret. I always admire that about you. Daniel could definitely learn a thing or two, she laughed. You know, I've been meaning to ask, do you have a good financial advisor? We've been thinking about getting one. I told her about my retirement account manager. I gave her his general background, the name of his firm, general information. Nothing I wouldn't have told anyone. but I noticed when I hung up that I had said more than I intended. She called again the following Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that, and slowly, over the next 3 weeks, without my quite realizing how it had happened, Samantha had become a regular presence in my life in a way she had never been before. We talked about Daniel, we talked about the house, we talked about the neighborhood and the neighbors, and whether they were going to get a dog, and between those conversations woven so seamlessly into the fabric of them, that it took me longer than I like to admit to see the pattern were the questions. Margaret, do you ever think about what you'd do if the house became too much to manage on your own? Do you have anyone helping you with the financial side of things? Like day-to-day stuff. What would you say your biggest expense is? Monthly? Just out of curiosity. Have you thought at all about what happens to this house eventually? Like estate planning-wise, I answered them. God help me. I answered them, because they came wrapped in warmth and concern and the pleasant fiction that Samantha was finally, after 7 years of marriage to my son, trying to build a genuine relationship with me. And because I was lonely in the way that widows sometimes are, not dramatically, not despairingly, but in the quiet, persistent way that makes any real human connection feel like something worth reaching for. I told myself she was growing up. I told myself people change. I told myself that this was what I had always wanted, a daughter-in-law who actually cared about me. I was a fool. I was a generous, trusting, completely well-intentioned fool. The dinner invitation came on a Thursday. "We want to cook for you," Samantha said. "A real dinner. Just the 3 of us. I've been working on a new recipe, and Daniel keeps talking about how good your visits are when you come for dinner, and I just thought, why don't we do it at our place for once? You do so much for us." I said yes immediately. I even offered to bring dessert. I showed up on a Friday evening with a lemon pound cake and a bottle of white wine, wearing a dress I liked, and feeling something I hadn't felt in a while. This response didn't load. My daughter-in-law stole my life savings. My housewarming gift became her biggest mistake. Part 1 opening. The gift that revealed her true face. My name is Margaret Wilson. And for most of my life, I believed one simple thing. Family was the one place where I never needed to protect myself. I wa pasted fan 1 bantlamut ngoy viet kig ban view YouTube chin yip. Zuavao fun tick chain. But today, my daughter-in-law stole my life savings. My housewarming gift became her biggest mistake. Jodun kanza. Nam nu chin 55 Quxami. Chain das nizulio chain. Hai viet ko chain thang 5 fun. Kukfuk nying dim eo va fun tick va fat chin nying dim mink de kick ban hai hun. Viet lai theo phong kijk chain de ko chuan hai hun va kick ting hun. Ketiong koi tunyat. Hup chafan long tiang YouTube tiang but do ngay Part 1. Viet mot fun modo zai quang 9120 thu modo bang mot hook cook mink hook ching. Modo hook bang mot hang don't gay chui. Bok lo hang don't cam suk ngay lip tuk tit lo sung dot ve tio de. Sodalamo twist goit suit da ma sam tip. Gak fun tip theo ko chuan din koi. Va bing lat nay bant dang sam de tuk te sam ko chuan ko ming da di duk bao sa. Va moi kanza theo zai va dunk king and qua. Doi soda viet fun 1 modo hook mink. Twist ching 6,000, 507,000. Bang tiang phong kijk kate chuan mi, hua ki. Chuntuk va gun gui viet fun 1 komo ta kan. Dunkung hang don't va doi twite. Zam mota. Tup trung va hang don't cam suk va tum linyan vat. Lin lak noi zung va kak fun dip theo va kit go ko chin. Tung hoi twai de tung kik ting cha ko chuan. Kethiong oi thanyat. Viet huantuan bang ting ong. Kit tuk fun kum zoi tiot fun sao. Louis chaloi chamuk din yan kum ye sang document. Va kom mo thakang, fun hook la fun chomp tum kwa ko chuan. Hook ma do la mot hang don't cook mink gwen yen vat ching yen vat fanzient. Dao eo ko, kom tam chutik he said. She said, huak chutik I don oi sao kak ko twite gwen yen vat. My daughter-in-law stole my life savings. My housewarming gift became her biggest mistake. Hook opening, 9120 words. I slammed my hand on the kitchen table so hard, the coffee cup shook because I had just found a 4,850 charge on my credit card for a designer patio set I never bought, delivered to an address I recognized immediately. My daughter-in-law's new house, the same woman who had smiled at me 3 weeks ago when I handed her a check for $15,000 and called it a mother's gift. She didn't steal from a stranger. She stole from the woman who had just tried to love her, and that housewarming gift I gave with my whole heart. It became the thing that exposed everything she had been planning all along. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, please subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is something I've never shared in full until right now. Part 1, the woman who counted what wasn't hers. Let me tell you something about grief that nobody prepares you for. It doesn't leave when you think it should. You go through the funeral, and the casseroles, and the sympathy cards, and the long, horrible weeks when everyone is calling and checking on you, and then one day, without announcement, the calls stop, the casseroles stop, the cards stop, and the world just goes right on spinning like your entire foundation hasn't been ripped out from under your feet. That's when grief really moves in. That's when it sits down across from you at the breakfast table and stares at you while you drink your coffee alone, for the first time in 41 years, and realize that this silence is what the rest of your life looks like now. My husband Robert passed on a Tuesday morning in October. He went to sleep beside me the night before the same way he had every night for 4 decades, and when I reached over to wake him for breakfast, he was already gone. No warning, no final conversation, no last chance to say the things we always believe we have more time to say. And then I was alone, 67 years old, alone, in a that held 41 years of a marriage that was never perfect but was always real. I want to tell you what I did with that grief, because it matters to everything that came after. I didn't fall apart. I wanted to, Lord. There were mornings I sat on the edge of the bed and genuinely did not know if my legs would hold me when I stood up. There were nights I talked to Robert's photograph, like he was sitting right there in the chair by the window. I am not ashamed of that. Grief makes you do the things you need to do to survive. But I also got up. Every morning I got up. I learned how to handle the things Robert had always handled: the bills, the small repairs, the insurance forms, the financial accounts. I learned which circuit breaker connected to which room. I learned how to talk to a plumber without getting taken advantage of. I learned how to sit in a quiet house on a Saturday night and not let the silence swallow me whole. I built a life, not the life I had planned, but a good life. A life I was genuinely proud of, and I had Daniel. My son, I need you to understand something before I go any further. Because this whole story, every painful, humiliating, heartbreaking piece of it lives or dies on this one truth. I loved my son the way only a mother can love a child she raised mostly alone. Daniel's father and I divorced when Daniel was 9. The years after that were not easy for either of us. I worked 2 jobs for a while. I skipped vacations. I drove a car that needed work I couldn't afford to have done. I packed lunches because eating out was a luxury we couldn't justify. I did all of it without complaint, or at least without the kind of complaint that I let Daniel see, because I believed deeply, completely, without a single doubt, that my job was to make sure he never felt the weight of our circumstances the way I did. I paid for his college every semester, every textbook. I drove him to campus his freshman year with a car full of dorm supplies and a check already written for the following semester's tuition, and I cried the whole 4 hours home he graduated. He built a career. He met Samantha at 34, married her at 35, and for the next 7 years I watched the 2 of them build something together from the outside, always welcome but never quite inside in the way I had hoped. Samantha was, and I want to be fair because fairness matters to me even now, Samantha was a beautiful woman with a sharp, organized mind and a way of conducting herself that always made a room feel like she was the one running it. She was polished in the way that takes real effort. Controlled, precise. Every outfit considered, every word measured, every smile deployed exactly when and where it was needed. She was never unkind to me. I want to be clear about that. She was never unkind. She was cordial, consistently, carefully, impeccably cordial. The kind of cordial that keeps a pleasant distance between 2 people while giving no one anything they could actually point to and call a problem. I told myself it was just her personality. I told myself some people are reserved. I told myself that what mattered was that she made my son happy, and she did seem to make him happy, and that was enough. That was enough right up until the moment it wasn't. When Daniel called to tell me they'd bought their first house, I was standing at my kitchen sink washing the breakfast dishes, and the sound of his voice, that bright, almost surprised happiness, like he still couldn't quite believe it was real, made me put down the dish I was holding and just listen. "Mom, we got the house. We actually got it." "Oh, Daniel." I pressed my hand over my mouth for a second because I could feel the tears already starting. "Oh, sweetheart, it's a real house, Mom, not an apartment, not a rental, a house with a yard. Tell me everything. Tell me right now." He told me everything: the neighborhood, the square footage, the yard that Samantha had already started planning out in her head, the kitchen with the good light that apparently she had mentioned approximately 40 times since they'd first seen it. He was laughing, and I was laughing, and for 10 whole minutes we were just a mother and her son, sharing something uncomplicated and genuinely good. I started planning the gift that same night, and I want you to understand something about that decision, because I've thought about it so many times in the months since. I've turned it over and examined it from every angle, looking for the moment where I made the wrong choice, where I was naive, or careless, or foolish, but I keep coming back to the same answer. I didn't make a wrong choice, I made a generous one. There is a difference. I went to my desk that evening and I pulled out a pad of paper and I wrote down what I could give them without touching anything I truly needed: my emergency fund, my monthly budget, the accounts I relied on for the day-to-day expenses of living alone. What I found was a number that felt both significant enough to mean something and small enough that I would genuinely not miss it. $15,000. I wrote it down on the paper and looked at it for a long time. Then I wrote the check. I baked Robert's mother's apple pie, the one with the lattice crust and the cinnamon sugar that I have made every Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthday and celebration for as long as I can remember, the one that smells like every good memory I've ever had, and I wrote a letter on the good cream-colored stationery that I keep for the moments in life that deserve more than a text message. In that letter, I told them what home had meant to Robert and me, what it had cost us not just in money but in years and work and choices, what I hoped it would come to mean to them. I told them the money was a gift, not a loan, not an investment, not something with strings attached. A gift. A mother giving her son something real because she could and because she wanted to. I tied the whole thing together with a blue ribbon. I drove to their house on a Saturday morning, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Light, Samantha answered the door. She was dressed already, put together the way she always was, and she smiled and opened her arms and said all the right things, Margaret. You didn't have to come all the way out here. Of course I did. I brought pie. You are too sweet, Daniel, your mother's here. She took the box from my hands, and I noticed barely, the way you notice something with the back of your mind before the front of it catches up, that her eyes went to the box and held there a half beat longer than they should have, before she looked back at me and smiled. Daniel came down the hallway and hugged me, and I held on a second longer than necessary because that's what mothers do, and we settled in the living room. Samantha set the box on the coffee table and pulled off the ribbon and made the right sounds about the pie, and then she lifted the envelope. She looked at Daniel. Something passed between them fast, wordless, the kind of look that married people exchange when they already know something. They opened the letter together, and I watched Daniel's face as he read it and saw the check. His expression went soft and overwhelmed in a way that looked completely real, and he shook his head slowly and said, Mom, you cannot do this. I already did. This is too much. It is exactly the right amount. Don't argue with me. He came around the table and hugged me again, and while his arms were around me, I looked over his shoulder at Samantha. She was still looking at the check, not at us, not at the moment. At the check, and her lips were moving, just barely. The smallest, almost imperceptible movement she was calculating. I didn't know that's what I was seeing. I filed it in the back of my mind under probably nothing, and had a piece of pie and stayed for 2 hours and drove home feeling warm and full and satisfied with myself. I had just handed Samantha Wilson the first number in a plan she was already building. I just didn't know it yet. The phone call started 12 days later. I want you to pay attention to the timing, because I think it matters. 12 days after the housewarming visit, Samantha, who had in 7 years of marriage to my son, called me spontaneously exactly twice, became a regular presence in my life. The first call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Margaret, I was just thinking about you and wanted to check in. How are you doing? I'm doing well, sweetheart. What a nice surprise. I just feel like we haven't talked enough. You know, like really talked. I want to be better about that. And she was warm, and she was interested, and she asked about my garden and my friends and my church group, and by the end of the call I was smiling at my phone like someone had just given me a gift. The next Wednesday she called again. How was your week? Did your friend Carol's surgery go okay? She had remembered Carol's name. She had remembered the surgery I'd mentioned in passing the week before. I told myself this was who Samantha had always been underneath, and that she had simply needed time to let it show. The calls continued. Every week, sometimes twice a week, and they were lovely, genuinely lovely, right up until the moment I started noticing the other thing. The questions, they started small, conversational. The kind of thing anyone might ask. Is it expensive to keep up a house that size on your own? I always worry about you. Do you have a good financial advisor? Someone you really trust? Have you thought at all about what you'd do if the house got to be too much? Like long term? I answered every one of them, because why wouldn't I? This was my daughter-in-law expressing concern. This was the relationship I had always wanted us to have. This was the breakthrough I had been hoping for. Then, about 3 weeks into our new rhythm, something shifted in a way I noticed but couldn't quite name. We were on the phone on a Thursday evening, and Samantha said, Margaret, can I ask you something kind of personal? Of course. When Robert passed, did you do a full review of all the accounts, like all of them? Because I've been reading about how many widows miss things, duplicate accounts, old policies, things that just get forgotten, and I just want to make sure you're protected. I felt something then. Not alarm, nothing as clear as alarm, more like a slight shift, a small wrongness I couldn't identify. I have a very good attorney, I said carefully, and a financial manager I've worked with for years. I'm well taken care of. Oh, of course you are. You're so organized. I worry, you do so much on your own. I let it go. The next week, she asked about my house, specifically what I thought it would appraise at, whether I'd had it assessed recently, whether I'd thought about what would happen to it eventually. And the week after that, she asked very casually, The way you asked something you've clearly been working up to for a while, whether I had ever considered simplifying. Downsizing. Maybe moving somewhere smaller, somewhere with less maintenance, somewhere I wouldn't have to manage everything alone. You know, she said, Daniel and I have been talking, and we would love for you to be closer. We've been thinking about ways to make that work. That's very sweet. Samantha, I mean it. We really want you to be part of our daily life. I said all the right things and got off of the phone and stood in my kitchen for a moment with a feeling I couldn't quite place. Then I pushed it aside because I wanted to believe her. Because believing her was easier. Because I was 67 years old and I was lonely in the particular, patient way that I had learned to carry around with me. And someone was offering me warmth and I took it. God help me, I took it every single time. The dinner invitation came 3 weeks after the calls started. We want to cook for you, Samantha said, just the three of us. A real dinner. You do so much for us, let us take care of you for once. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I showed up on a Friday evening with a lemon pound cake and a bottle of white wine, and I was in a good mood, a genuinely good mood, because I had spent the drive over thinking about how things were changing between us and feeling grateful for it. The table was set beautifully, candles, cloth napkins, the good dishes. Samantha had made pasta from scratch, I could tell, because there was a faint dusting of flour on the counter by the stove, and the whole house smelled warm and welcoming. We ate and we talked, and it was easy in a way our evenings together had never quite been before. Daniel was relaxed, Samantha was laughing at her own stories. I thought, this is it, this is what I always wanted. And then when the dinner plates were cleared and the wine was poured, and I was sitting back in my chair, feeling full and content and genuinely happy, Samantha got up from the table. She went to the counter, she came back with a folder. A thick, organized, clearly prepared in advance folder, which she set on the table in front of her with both hands and a smile that I suddenly realized had never once, in the entire evening, actually reached her eyes. Margaret, she said, I want to talk to you about something. Something Daniel and I have been thinking about for a while, and we think it's really exciting, and we hope you will too. I looked at the folder. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at his wine glass. What is this? I asked. We've been doing some research, Samantha said, opening the folder, and we put together some numbers, just to show you what we're thinking. What could be possible? She turned the folder around and slid it across the table toward me. The first page had a header at the top, not handwritten, not casual, but printed and formatted like a professional document. Wilson Family Financial Consolidation Plan. I stared at those words for a long moment. Samantha, my voice came out quieter than I intended. What is this? Just look at the numbers. I promise it makes sense when you see it laid out. I looked at the numbers. The first column was headed Property Assets, and under it was my house, my address, and estimated current market value that was, I noticed immediately, extremely close to what an actual appraisal would show. More precise than a casual guess. More precise than something you'd arrive at without research. The second column was headed Liquid Assets Retirement, and the numbers beneath it made my stomach drop. They were close, not exact, but close enough that they had clearly been calculated from real information, real numbers, real knowledge of my financial situation, information I had not given them, information that had been gathered. Where did you get these numbers? I asked. Oh, I just did some estimates, based on what you've mentioned. I had never mentioned these numbers. Not these numbers, not specifically, I kept reading. The plan was detailed, thorough, it had clearly taken time. According to what was laid out in front of me, I would sell my house. I would use the proceeds combined with what it called my available retirement funds to pay off Daniel and Samantha's mortgage completely. In return, I would move into what the document called a private lower-level suite, which was the basement in their home, with shared access to the main living areas. My remaining funds would be combined with their household budget under what it called joint family management to maximize efficiency. I read it twice, then I set it down on the table and I looked at my son. Daniel, he finally looked up from his wine glass. Did you know about this? A long pause, long enough to be its own answer. We talked about it, he said quietly. We thought it made sense for everyone, Samantha said. Margaret, your house is a lot to manage on your own. You've said so yourself. And if you sold it, you'd free up significant funds that are just sitting there, being underutilized, and you'd be close to us. You'd have family around. You wouldn't be alone. The word alone landed with a precision I recognized. She had listened to me. All those weeks of phone calls, she had listened to every word I said about being alone, about the house being a lot, about the long, quiet evenings. She had collected everything I confided in her like pieces on a board. And now she was using them. You wouldn't be alone. Margaret, she said it again, softer, that's really what this is about. We want to take care of you. I sat very still. There is a particular kind of anger, the kind that doesn't flare up hot and loud, but settles down cold and clear like water finding its level that I had only felt a few times in my life. I felt it then. I reached out and I closed the folder. No, Samantha blinked, like the word was in a language she hadn't expected. Margaret, just no. I moved the folder to the side. Away from me. My house is not for sale. My retirement accounts are not a family resource, and I will not be moving into your basement. Silence. I think I said that I would like to go home now. Daniel started to say something, my name, maybe, or an explanation, but I was already pushing back from the table, already reaching for my purse, already deciding that whatever came next would not happen tonight. Not here. Not with that folder on the table between us, like a verdict that had already been written. I picked up my pound cake from the counter. I walked to the front door. I put my coat on. I looked back at Samantha, who was still sitting at the table, very still, the folder in front of her. Thank you for dinner, I said. It was lovely, and I left. I drove home in the dark, and I did not cry, and I did not turn the radio on, and I did not call anyone. I just drove, and somewhere on that dark highway, somewhere between their new house with its beautiful kitchen, and the good light and my son, who had not said a single word to defend me, somewhere in that dark and quiet, I stopped being the woman who always wanted to believe the best, and I started paying attention. I got home, I put the pound cake on the counter, and I sat down at my kitchen table. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at that table and I thought about every phone call, every question, every carefully worded expression of concern. I thought about the folder, the printed, formatted, organized folder, and the numbers inside it that were too accurate to be guesses. I thought about what it meant that someone had spent time, real time, researching my house value and estimating my retirement accounts and putting together a multi-page document with a title. Wilson Family Financial Consolidation Plan. My name was in the title. My assets were in the columns, my home was a line item, and my son had known about it. Around 2 a.m, I got up and went to my desk. I opened the drawer where I keep my important financial documents organized, labeled the way Robert and I had always kept them, and I went through everything. Checking account, savings account, retirement account, access, investment account, everything was as it should be. I almost went to bed, but something made me keep going. Something in the back of my mind that wouldn't let me rest, that kept pressing, kept saying, keep looking. Margaret, keep looking. I went to the filing cabinet in the study, and in the back of the bottom drawer, behind a folder labeled Miscellaneous Old Accounts, I found it, an old credit card. A card I had opened years ago as an emergency backup, the kind of thing you keep and forget about, the kind of thing that exists in the back of a drawer, and you never think about because you never use it. A card that Daniel had access to. I had added him years ago, 5, maybe 6 years ago, during a period when I'd had a minor health scare, and we'd agreed it made sense for him to be able to access something in case of an emergency. When things stabilized, when I felt better, I'd meant to revisit the arrangement and simply never did. There was always something else to attend to, and it felt like a small thing, and Daniel had never once touched it, never once given me a single reason to think about it. I almost didn't check the balance, but I did. I logged into the account on my laptop, sitting at my desk at 2:30 a.m. in my quiet house, and I saw it, a pending charge, placed 4 days ago, before the dinner, before any of this had come to the surface, before I'd said no, $4,850. The merchant name was a home goods retailer, a luxury one, the kind that sells outdoor furniture at prices that make ordinary people blink. I sat there looking at it, and then I remembered, at dinner before the folder came out, back when we were still eating and laughing, and I still thought the evening was just an evening, Samantha had mentioned, so casually, so conversationally, that she had been looking at outdoor patio furniture, that she had found this incredible set teak and wrought iron that would be perfect for the backyard they were planning to renovate, that she hadn't pulled the trigger on it yet because they were being careful about the budget. She had described the set, she had described the exact set, while the charge was already pending on my card, the card she didn't have, the card Daniel had. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something colder and more precise than fear, from the absolute, crystalline, nauseating clarity of understanding exactly what was happening. She hadn't just proposed a plan at dinner, she had already started executing it. I sat at my desk until 4 a.m, and then I made a decision. I was not going to be a woman who sat quietly in her house and let the people who were supposed to love her take from her while smiling and calling it family. I was not going to be that woman. Tomorrow I would go to the bank, and it would be the beginning of the end of everything Samantha had planned. I didn't sleep, not a single hour. I sat at my kitchen table until the sky outside started turning from black to that pale, washed-out gray that comes just before dawn, and I went through everything again. Every account number, every password, every card, every document, Every piece of my financial life that I had spent 40 years building carefully and quietly the way people do when they understand that security is not something the world hands you, but something you construct piece by piece with your own hands and your own sacrifices. I thought about the folder, that thick, organized, printed folder with my name in the title and my home in the columns and my retirement savings treated like a resource waiting to be allocated. I thought about how long it must have taken to put together. How many evenings Samantha must have sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd served me pasta and poured me wines and smiled that smile, researching property values, estimating account balances, drafting and revising a plan she intended to present to me like a business proposal. And then I thought about my son sitting across from me and not saying a word. That was the thing that kept circling back, not the folder. Not the numbers, not even the charge on the card, though that was coming. That was very much still coming, and I hadn't forgotten about it for a single second. It was Daniel, my Daniel. The boy I had packed lunches for and driven to soccer practice and stayed up all night with when he had pneumonia at age 11, and I was so frightened I called the doctor 3 times in one evening. That boy had sat at his dinner table and watched his wife slide a folder across to me with my life inside it, and he had looked at his wine glass. By the time it was fully light outside, I had made a list. I am a list person. I always have been. Robert used to tease me about it. The way I would write things down before I acted on them. The way I needed to see the steps in front of me before I could move. It drove him a little crazy sometimes, but it also meant that in 40 years of marriage and 5 years of widowhood and whatever this new chapter was turning out to be, I had never once acted in panic. I had always acted in order. The list had 4 items on it. The bank was first. I was there when the doors opened at 9 o'clock. The branch manager, a woman named Patricia who had known me for years, who had helped me restructure the accounts after Robert died, looked up when I walked in and read something in my face immediately, because she stood up from her desk before I had even reached the counter. "Margaret, come sit down. What's happened?" I told her enough. Not everything, not the dinner, not the folder, not the full scope of what I was beginning to understand. I told her about the card. I showed her the pending charge on my phone. Patricia looked at it, and then she looked at me, and her expression shifted from concern to something that was very carefully professional. "Do you want to dispute the charge? I want to cancel the card completely. And I want Daniel's access removed from every account he's listed on. Today, right now, while I'm sitting here. Margaret, I know what I'm doing." Patricia, a pause, then she turned to her computer. We spent 45 minutes going through everything. The emergency card canceled, the charge reversed pending investigation. The joint access Daniel had on the secondary checking account I'd set up years ago for the occasional time I needed him to handle something while I was traveling removed. The digital access codes changed. The security questions on the investment account portal updated. When we were done, I sat back in the chair and let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in my chest since 2:30 in the morning. "Is there anything else I should know about?" Patricia asked carefully. "Not yet, but I wanted to make sure this was solid before anything else happened." She walked me out to the lobby, and she touched my arm before I went through the door. "You're doing the right thing, Margaret." I knew that. But hearing someone else say it, someone outside the family, someone with no stake in the outcome, meant more than I expected it to. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for about 10 minutes. Just sat. Watching people walk in and out, normal people having a normal Thursday morning, depositing checks and arguing mildly with tellers about fees and conducting the ordinary business of ordinary lives. I had been one of those people yesterday. I drove home and crossed the bank off my list. The second item was my attorney. I called him from my kitchen, still in my coat before I even put the kettle on. His assistant put me through immediately when I said it was Margaret Wilson, and it was important. And when he picked up, he had that particular lawyer quality, not warmth. Exactly, but a certain careful attentiveness that makes you feel like you are the only thing in the room that matters. I told him about the dinner, I told him about the folder. I told him about the numbers that were too accurate to be guesses, and the credit card charge that had been placed 4 days before I had said no to anything. He asked me several questions in a very measured tone. When did the calls start? What specific financial information had I shared verbally? Whether the folder had been left at my home or taken back by Samantha. Taken back, I told him. She had taken it with her when she left. Of course she had. He told me to document everything I could remember, dates, the content of phone conversations, the specific numbers I had seen in the folder, and to send it to him by the end of the week. He told me the credit card charge, if disputed properly, was recoverable. He told me that what Samantha had done walked a line, and that whether it crossed into anything legally actionable depended on details he'd need to review carefully. But what I'd strongly recommend right now, he said, is that you protect everything you can protect proactively. before anyone has the chance to try again. I already went to the bank this morning, a brief pause. Good. What about your home documents, the deed, the mortgage records, the will in my filing cabinet, here at the house? And who has a key to your house? I thought about the spare key. The one I had given to Daniel 3 years ago. Not for any particular reason, just because it seemed like the kind of thing you did. The kind of practical, sensible precaution that made sense when you lived alone and your son lived 40 minutes away. If something happened to me, if I ever needed him urgently and couldn't get to the door, the ordinary logic of a mother who wanted her family close, the key that Daniel's wife now had access to. I'll take care of that today, I said. My attorney paused again, and then said something I have thought about many times since. Margaret, I want to say something, and I want you to hear it without taking it the wrong way. You didn't do anything wrong. Being generous with your family is not a character flaw. The mistake, if there was a mistake, was trusting people who were actively planning not to deserve it. That's not on you, I thanked him. I put the phone down. And then I sat with that for a moment, because I needed to, because underneath all the cold, clear, purposeful anger that had been carrying me through the morning, there was something else. Something I hadn't let myself look at directly yet. Something that felt very much like the particular grief of discovering that someone you loved had been performing love back at you. I let myself feel it for exactly 5 minutes. Then I got up and I made a cup of coffee and I crossed my attorney off the list. Item 3, the passwords. I spent 2 hours that afternoon going through every account, every portal, every piece of digital access I had. Email banking, investment accounts, the online portal for my retirement fund, the utility accounts, the insurance, my Amazon account, my pharmacy account, the account for the grocery delivery service I'd signed up for the previous winter when the ice had been bad. Every single one new password, strong passwords, the kind my attorney's assistant had once walked me through, a combination of letters and numbers and symbols that meant nothing and couldn't be guessed. I wrote each one in a small notebook that I then put in a place in my house that no one else knew about. When I was done, I sat back and realized I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, power. A small, quiet, steady kind of power that comes from the knowledge that you have done what needed to be done and done it correctly. The kind of power that doesn't announce itself, that just settles in your chest and stays there. There was one item left on the list, the locks. I called a locksmith that same afternoon. He arrived within the hour, a young man with a clipboard who assessed the front door, the back door, and the side door from the garage, and quoted me a price that I agreed to immediately without negotiating. While he was working, my phone rang. Daniel. I looked at the screen. I let it ring 4 times, then I answered. Mom. His voice was careful, deliberate, like he'd rehearsed the opening. I think we should talk. I agree. Last night, Samantha's plan, I want you to know that it wasn't meant to… Daniel. I kept my voice very even. Before we talk about anything else, I need to tell you something. This morning I went to the bank and I removed your access from every account you were listed on, and I canceled the emergency credit card. Silence. Mom, there was a pending charge on that card, $4,850. To a luxury home goods retailer placed 4 days ago. Do you want to tell me about that? The silence that followed was different from the first one. It was heavier, the kind of silence that has weight and texture and the very specific shape of someone who has just understood that they have been caught. That was… He stopped, started again. Samantha saw the card. In my wallet. She thought what, Daniel? Another silence. Longer. She thought it was a family account that we were all… It was my emergency card. My name, my account. The only reason your name was on it was because I put it there 6 years ago in case I had a medical crisis and you needed to help me. That is the only reason, and she used it to buy patio furniture. I heard him exhale. A long, slow breath that sounded less like air and more like something collapsing. I didn't know she did that, Mom. I swear to you I didn't know. And here is the hardest thing about that moment. The thing I have turned over in my mind 100 times since. I believed him. Not entirely, not the way I would have believed him a week ago, before I had seen the folder and understood the scope of what had been planned. But enough. Enough to think that whatever Daniel's role in all of this was, it was probably not the same as Samantha's role. There are people who plan things, and there are people who go along with things because going along is easier than standing up, and because they have convinced themselves that going along isn't really the same as choosing. I knew which one Samantha was. I was still deciding about my son. I'm changing the locks today, I said, not because I hate you. Because I need to know that my home is secure. That is a reasonable thing for a person to need. A long pause. And then very quietly, yeah. Okay, yeah, I understand. I didn't know if he did, but I appreciated that he didn't fight me on it. We stayed on the phone for a few more minutes. He was trying, I could hear it, the effort of it. The way he was choosing his words carefully in a way he hadn't always done when we talked. He said he was sorry. Not the big sweeping sorry that covers everything and explains nothing, but a small specific sorry about the card, and about dinner, and about sitting at the table and not saying anything. I froze, he said. When she brought out the folder, I should have said something. I should have warned you. I froze, I know. That's not an excuse, no. It's not. I told him I needed some time. He said he understood. I said I would call him when I was ready. He said okay. We hung up. The locksmith finished 20 minutes later. New locks on all 3 exterior doors, 2 new deadbolts, new keys cut. He handed me a set of keys and I held them in my palm for a moment. My house, my locks, my keys. I tipped him $20 and closed the door behind him and stood in the entryway of the home that Robert and I had built. And I breathed. I had done everything on the list. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Samantha came to my house the next morning. I didn't invite her. She didn't call ahead. I heard the car in the driveway and looked out and saw her getting out of the driver's side. And even from inside I could tell, just from the way she was moving, that this was not a cordial visit. I opened the door before she knocked. We looked at each other through the screen door. Margaret. Her voice was controlled, but barely. Underneath the surface of it was something tightly wound. We need to talk, we do, I agreed. I did not open the screen door. Something registered in her face, the door, the fact that I was not stepping back and letting her in automatically the way I always had. The fact that the dynamic of this conversation was already different from any we'd ever had. Can I come in? I think we can talk here. Her jaw tightened. Just slightly. Fine. I want to understand what happened yesterday. With the bank accounts, I protected my finances. What specifically do you want to understand about that? You didn't have to do it, like you didn't have to go cancel everything without even talking to us first. It felt she stopped, recalibrated. It felt like an accusation, Samantha. There was a $4,850 charge on my credit card for patio furniture delivered to your address. I'd call that more than an accusation. Her expression shifted. She had prepared for a version of this conversation. I could see that she had rehearsed something, come ready with a particular approach. But the directness of what I'd just said had interrupted whatever sequence she'd planned. That was a misunderstanding, she said carefully. Daniel had the card in his wallet, and you thought it was yours to use. I thought it was a shared family account. There is no shared family account. Samantha, there never has been. The only reason Daniel was listed on that card was as an emergency contact in case something happened to me. That is it. That is the only reason. She looked at me steadily. Recalibrating again, processing, she said. I hear you. And I'm sorry about the card. That was a mistake and I should have asked first. But that doesn't mean. She took a breath. The plan I put together, the dinner we had that came from a genuine place. We genuinely want you to be taken care of by selling my house and moving into your basement, by being close to us, by having your assets working for everyone instead of just sitting. My retirement savings are not sitting. They are invested and managed and they are mine. They are not a family resource. They are mine. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger exactly, something more precise than anger. Something that looked almost like offense, the particular offense of someone who has been told no by people they did not believe would say no. You gave us $15,000, she said. That's a lot of money. Margaret, it seemed like you wanted to help us. I did want to help you. I gave you a gift, and that gift made us think. It made you think what? That I was open for business, that because I gave once, I'd given you permission to take. The word take landed hard. I watched it land. That's not fair, Samantha. I kept my voice very steady. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about the answer before you give it to me. When you were putting together that folder, when you were researching my house value and estimating my retirement accounts and drafting a multi-page financial plan with my name in the title, did you ask me first? Did you call me and say, Margaret, would you be open to this kind of conversation? Did you give me any choice at all before you decided what should happen to my home and my savings? Silence. No, I said, you didn't. You spent weeks building a relationship with me, calling me, asking about my life, pretending to be interested in my garden and my friends, and you were collecting information. You were building a case, and then you presented it to me at a dinner table over pasta and wine like you had already decided and were just waiting for me to agree. Her mouth opened. Close that folder, I said, had my financial information in it that I never gave you. Numbers that were too precise to be guesses. I want to know how you got them. Another silence. Longer. I did some research, public records, property assessments, and the retirement account estimates. A beat. Extrapolation. Based on things you mentioned. I never mentioned those specific numbers. Samantha. She held my gaze, and in that moment, in the silence between what she had said and what I had said, and everything that was now sitting in the open air between us, I watched something shift in her. Not guilt exactly, not shame, more like the quiet acknowledgement that she had underestimated me. That she had come to my house expecting a different version of this conversation, A version where I was smaller, softer, more easily managed. And she was recalculating. I want my spare key back, I said. Something flashed across her face. We're family, Margaret. We should have access. No, I said it the same way I'd said it at the dinner table. Quiet, clear, final. You don't have access to my home any more than I have access to yours. That is what family actually means. That is what respect looks like. I don't have the key with me, then bring it by when you do. Or Daniel can return it. I've changed the locks so the key won't work anymore, but I'd like it back regardless. She stared at me. And I realized, standing in my own doorway, holding the frame of my own screen door, that I was not shaking, I was not apologizing. I was not softening the edges of what I was saying to make her more comfortable with it. For the first time in this entire situation, I was not managing anyone's feelings but my own. It felt extraordinary. I think you're being very unfair, Samantha said finally. I think you're taking something that came from a place of family and turning it into something ugly. And I think you're going to regret this, maybe. I held her gaze. But it's my life to regret, she left. I watched her car back out of the driveway and pull away, and I stayed in the doorway for a moment longer, the cool morning air coming through the screen. My neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. A car went by, an ordinary morning going on in its ordinary way, completely indifferent to the fact that something in my life had just fundamentally shifted. I went inside, I poured a cup of coffee, I sat down at my kitchen table, and for the first time in what felt like a very long time, I was completely, entirely, peacefully alone in my home, with my locks, with my keys, with my life exactly where it belonged. In my own hands. But that evening something unexpected happened. Something I had not put on any list. Something I could not have planned for, because it came from the one direction I had not fully accounted for. My phone rang at 8:15. Daniel, I almost didn't answer. I was tired in the deep down way that goes past physical exhaustion into something more fundamental, and I wasn't sure I had anything left for another hard conversation. But I answered, because he was still my son, Mom. His voice was different from that morning. Something had gone out of it, the careful, rehearsed quality was gone, and what was left sounded younger and more tired and stripped down to something real. Can I come over, not to argue, not to talk about any of it? I need to see you. I thought about it for 10 full seconds. Come for coffee, I said. Just coffee. He arrived 20 minutes later. He knocked, which he had not always done. I let him in. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table I had sat at alone at 2:30 in the morning with the card statement on my screen and the cold, clarifying certainty of what I was looking at settling into my bones. I poured 2 cups. I sat across from him, and we sat there for a moment in a silence that was different from all the other silences that had come before it, not the silence of people withholding, but the silence of 2 people who are both too tired to pretend anymore. I didn't know about the card, he said finally. I need you to believe that I do, but I knew about the folder. I knew she was working on it. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. I told myself it was a good idea, that you'd see it was a good idea, that it made financial sense, and you'd appreciate that we were thinking about it. You told yourself that. Yeah, Daniel. That folder said I would sell my home. He looked down at the table. This is the home your father and I built. This is where you grew up. This is where I am staying for as long as I can. There is no version of a family plan that includes me selling this house. I know that now. You should have known it then. He didn't argue. I'll give him that. He took it the way you have to take the things you've earned, without trying to negotiate your way out of them. We talked for almost 2 hours. Not about plans or finances or folders. We talked the way we used to. Before Samantha, before adulthood, before the carefully managed distance that had settled between us over the years. He told me things I hadn't known about pressures in their marriage, about financial stress that had been building, about the way Samantha had framed all of this to him until it had seemed somehow like a reasonable idea rather than what it actually was. I listened. I didn't excuse it, but I listened. At the end of it, I walked him to the door. He stopped on the porch and looked at me with an expression that reminded me so much of the 11-year-old with pneumonia that I had to look away for a second. Mom, I'm sorry, not the small specific sorry from before. The real one, I know, I said. He left and I closed the door, and I stood in my entryway in my house with its new locks and its new keys and thought about what it cost people to finally tell the truth and what it cost the people who had to hear it. More than I expected, and less than I would have paid to keep the lie alive. The week after Daniel left my porch, the house was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced since the first months after Robert died. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the pressurized kind. The kind that sits on your chest and reminds you every hour or so that something unresolved is still out there breathing, waiting, not finished with you yet. I went about my days. I watered my garden. I had coffee with my neighbor Ruth on Tuesday morning the way I always did. I went to church on Sunday and sat in my usual pew and sang the hymns I knew by heart and tried to let the familiarity of it settle me. On the outside, anyone watching would have said Margaret Wilson was doing just fine. On the inside, I was waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for. That this response didn't load. Part 3 Louis, Viet du 4000 5000 the Linkate Lin Mike, Vikak Fun Chuk Chum Ko Chunt, Fahoit Twite Thou Tang Mok Ko Chunt Lin Mike Ki Gep Lai. Moi Fun Lin Mike Vai Fun Chuk, Kom Zoi Tilt Lai Ko Chunt A Do Fun Moi. Linkate Kak Fun Kwa Ko Chunt Mot Kike Lin Mike. Suzum Ko Chunt Tip Zuk Kak Fun Du Chi Chude. Trangat Guang Dot Ngot, Kom Suzum Gak Do Zong Huak Dio De Fu. Fong Kak K Chunt Mi, Zotman Zao Kam Suk. Chuntuk Vagun Gui Hom Mo Da Kang Tup Chung Va Hang Dom Kam Suk Va Tum Linian Vut. Viet Fun Tip Dat Dim 1010 Va Bosung Tit Do Ko Chun. Sir Loi AI. K Theo Ngoi Tunut. Tung Do Kik Ting Kom Viet Lan Man. K Tuk Fun Kom Zoi Tilt Fun Sao. Louis Chaloi Chomuk Dinyan Kom Nye Sang Muk Document. Moit 23 Futok Kun Komini Climax Vadat 1015 Mini Climb. Katent 12 Foot Ka 1 Twist Loan So Suck Don Zen Mini Cliffhanger. Tung Ting Dut Nyen Shafan Unkwa Kaknyan Vat. Tim Nyib Diok Kik Ting. Tuk Te Vagun. Ace 10 Foot. Kompel. Tam Dang Zotoi Zan. Lukham Mo Dakang. Kunka Fun Gaik Chum By Viet. Viet Van Ban Fu Hop V TTS Va Chikan Viet Noi Zung Va Viet Dung Lengnya. Dao Io Ko. Kom Tam Chutik he said. She said Huak Chutik I Don Noi Sao Kak Ko Twite Gwenyen Vut. Part 3 What Silence Cost. The week after Daniel left my porch, the house was quiet in a way I hadn't felt since the first months after Robert died. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the pressurized kind. The kind that sits behind your sternum and reminds you, at random moments throughout an otherwise ordinary day, that something unresolved is still out there, still breathing. Still not finished with you. I went about my routine the way you do when you are holding yourself together through sheer habit. Coffee at 7, garden at 8. The crossword puzzle I'd been doing every morning for 15 years, though that week I kept stopping mid-clue and staring at nothing for minutes at a time before catching myself. I had coffee with my neighbor Ruth on Tuesday the way I always did. I went to church on Sunday and sat in my usual pew and sang the hymns I knew by heart and tried to let the familiarity of it do what familiarity is supposed to do. It mostly worked. What didn't work was the evenings. The evenings were when my mind would not stay where I put it. I'd be reading or watching something on television or doing nothing in particular, and it would circle back to the folder, to the numbers, to Samantha's face in my doorway and the way she'd said we're family. We should have access, like those words were a key that should open anything she pointed them at. And then I'd think about Daniel at my kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup saying I knew about the folder. He knew. He had sat across from his wife while she researched my financial life and drafted a plan for redistributing it, and he had told himself it was a good idea, that I'd see the sense in it, that I'd appreciate the thought. I turned that over and over, the way you work a stone in your palm, feeling its edges, its weight, trying to understand its shape. On the 9th day, Samantha called. I almost didn't answer. My thumb hovered over the decline button for 3 full rings, then something stubbornness maybe, or the particular curiosity of a woman who has already seen the worst and finds she is no longer afraid of what comes next made me pick up. Margaret, her voice was smooth, composed, the version of Samantha that had called me every Wednesday for 3 weeks and asked about my garden. I was hoping we could talk. Really talk, without things getting heated. I'm listening. I owe you an apology, a pause, timed the way pauses are timed when someone has rehearsed them. The credit card, that was wrong. I should have asked. I got ahead of myself and I didn't handle it well, and I'm sorry, I waited. And the dinner, I think I presented things in a way that felt more like a demand than a conversation, and that wasn't my intention. I care about this family. Margaret, I care about you, and I got so focused on the solution that I skipped the part where I actually talked to you first. It was a good apology. Genuinely well constructed. It hit all the right notes: acknowledgement, accountability, expressed care. If I had received it 6 weeks ago, before the calls started, before I'd understood the pattern behind them, I would probably have cried and told her how much it meant and invited her to lunch. But I had spent 9 days thinking, and I had arrived, somewhere around day 6, at a question I couldn't stop turning over. How do you know when someone is sorry, versus when someone is sorry they got caught? I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. Can I ask you something? Of course. The folder. The financial plan. You put real time into that. You researched property values. You estimated account balances. That doesn't happen in an afternoon. I paused. When did you start working on it? A beat. Slightly longer than it should have been. I don't know exactly. A few weeks maybe. When I get an idea, I like to research it properly. A few weeks I let that sit. So you started planning what to do with my house and my retirement savings before you ever mentioned any of it to me. Before you asked whether I might be open to any kind of conversation about my finances. You just started planning. Margaret. And the calls, I said. The Wednesday calls, the questions about my house value, and my financial advisor and whether I'd thought about downsizing. Those were part of it, weren't they? You were gathering information. The silence this time was the real kind. Not rehearsed, actual. I was trying to understand your situation so I could... Samantha, my voice came out quieter than I intended, and somehow that made it land harder. I'm 67 years old. I was married for 41 years. I raised a child mostly by myself. I have been through things that would break people half my age, and I have handled every one of them. I am not someone whose situation needs to be assessed without her knowledge. Another silence says, I hear you, she said finally, and then shifting slightly. Testing a different angle, I just don't want you to be alone. Margaret, that's real. Whatever else you think about the folder or the plan, my concern about you being alone is real. And there it was. The card she kept returning to, the one she'd played at the dinner table, and on all those Wednesday calls, and now here again, because she had noticed correctly that it was the card most likely to get past my defenses. The loneliness card, the you don't have to do this alone card. I know you think that's a vulnerability, I said. And you're not wrong that I get lonely sometimes. People who live alone do. But Samantha, being lonely is not the same as being unable to manage my own life. And concern for someone does not entitle you to make plans for their home and their money without asking them. The line was very quiet. I think, she said slowly, that you've decided to see me as the villain in this. And I'm not sure there's anything I can say to change that. I haven't decided anything about you. I've just been paying attention. She said goodbye shortly after that. Politely. The way she always said goodbye, carefully, correctly, giving nothing away. I put the phone down and stood in my kitchen for a moment. And then something occurred to me, something I had been circling without quite landing on for 9 days. Something about that folder. About the numbers that were too precise to be guesses. I went to my desk, I opened my email. I started going back through the conversation Samantha and I had on the phone over those 3 weeks. I hadn't written them down, but I'd sent a few texts to my friend Carol during that period, little things. Mentions of what was happening. The way you text a friend when something is making you feel a certain way and you need to tell someone. I scrolled back through those texts now, looking for anything specific I'd said I'd shared with Samantha. And I found something. About 10 days into our new phone call rhythm, Samantha had sent me a link. A news article, she said, about financial planning for retirees. I remembered it now. I'd clicked it briefly. Hadn't read the whole thing, closed it. But I'd clicked it. From her email on my phone, I sat very still. I am not a technical person. I want to be honest about that. I know what I know and I don't pretend to know more. But I had a nephew, my sister Barbara's youngest son, who worked in technology, and I called him that same afternoon. Aunt Margaret. He sounded surprised and pleased to hear from me. Everything okay? I need to ask you something technical and I need you to be straight with me. Okay. If someone sends you a link in an email and you click on it, is there anything that can happen? Anything that could let them see things on your phone? A pause. Can you tell me more about the context? I told him about the link. About the fact that the folder had contained numbers I hadn't shared. About the timeline. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Aunt Margaret, by itself, clicking a link doesn't give someone access to your accounts. They'd need you to enter credentials somewhere, or install something. Did the link take you anywhere that asked you to log into anything? I thought about it. No, it just went to an article. Okay, so probably not that. Another pause. But there are other ways to gather financial information that don't require anything technical. Public records like property assessments, those are fully public. And if someone has access to paper documents or knows where you keep things, he stopped. I stopped. Has anyone been in your home unsupervised recently? He asked carefully. Like, do they have a key? I thought about the spare key. The one I'd asked Samantha to return. The one she'd said she didn't have with her. The one I still had not received back because the locks were now changed and it no longer mattered, or so I had told myself. They had a key, I said. Past tense, I've changed the locks. Good, his voice was careful. I'm not saying anything definite happened, Aunt Margaret. I just think it's worth considering whether the information could have come from physical documents. If someone had access to your home and knew where you kept your financial files, I thanked him. I put the phone down and I went to the filing cabinet in my study. Everything looked exactly as it always did. The folders were in their correct order. The labels were correct. The documents inside each folder were, I checked now, more carefully than I ever had before the documents were there. But a filing cabinet doesn't tell you if someone opened it. It doesn't show you if someone photographed a document with a phone camera and put it back exactly as they found it. It just sits there with its contents intact, entirely indifferent to whether it has been touched. I stood in my study and thought about every time Daniel or Samantha had been in my house with access to this room. Holidays, birthday visits. The afternoon 3 years ago when I'd had a stomach bug and Daniel had come to check on me and I'd been in bed for most of his visit. The afternoon I'd been in bed when Daniel was in the house alone. I felt sick. Not the dramatic, overwhelming kind of sick that makes you grab for something to hold on to. The quiet kind, the settling into your stomach kind that comes when something you've been half suspecting becomes something you can no longer dismiss. I called my attorney back. I told him about the link, the conversation with my nephew, the filing cabinet. I told him what I was considering, that the financial information in the folder might have come from physical documents accessed without my knowledge during a visit to my home. He listened. He asked a few precise questions, and then he said something that I wrote down on the notepad on my desk because I wanted to make sure I remembered it exactly. Margaret, if that's what happened, it's serious. Not necessarily criminal in the conventional sense, proving intent and method would be complex. But it tells you something definitive about the character and the plan, and it changes what I'd recommend going forward. What do you recommend? Document everything you remember. Every visit, every date you can approximate, every instance they were in your home, and you were not fully present. And then I want you to consider whether there are any other financial touchpoints we haven't reviewed yet. Anything they might have visibility into that we haven't looked at. I spent the rest of that day doing exactly that, and that was when I found the second thing. Not a charge this time. Something quieter, and in some ways worse. I was going through an old email account, one I rarely used anymore. One I'd set up years ago for online shopping and had mostly forgotten about when I found a forwarding rule. A rule I had not created, set up to send copies of certain emails automatically to an external address. The address meant nothing to me. A string of letters and numbers at a generic email service. But the rule had been active for 11 days, and in those 11 days, it had forwarded 14 emails, account notifications, quarterly statement summary, an insurance renewal notice. 14 emails, 11 days. The forwarding rule had been created on a date I recognized immediately. The date Daniel had come to my house alone to check on me when I was sick. I sat at my desk and I did not move for a long time. He had been in this room at this desk while I was in bed 20 feet away, and he had, or someone using his access had gone into my email and set up a forwarding rule so that financial notifications would automatically copy to another address. I deleted the rule, I changed the password, I sat back in my chair, and I thought about the man who had sat at my kitchen table 9 days ago and said, with an expression I had believed was genuine, "I didn't know about the card. I swear to you I didn't know." He hadn't known about the card. But had he known about this? The question was different from all the other questions I'd been carrying. This one had a specific weight, a specific shape, because it forced me to decide something I had been avoiding deciding. Where exactly did I place my son in all of this? There are people who plan, there are people who go along, and then there is a third category, the people who do small, specific knowing things, and then construct enough deniability around them that they can look you in the eye and feel almost like they're telling the truth. I didn't know which category Daniel was in. I needed to find out. I called him that evening. 6:40, he answered on the second ring. "Mom, hi, is everything? I need you to come over. Tonight." Alone, a pause. "Is something wrong?" "I'll tell you when you get here." He arrived at 7:30. He knocked, same as before. I let him in. I did not offer coffee this time. I walked him to the study and I sat in the chair behind the desk and I turned the laptop screen toward him. He looked at the screen. The email account. The forwarding rule, I'd taken a screenshot before I deleted it. The date it was created, his face changed, not in the way a guilty person's face changes, not in the sudden, caught-out way that collapses inward, in the slower, more complicated way that comes when someone sees something that confirms a fear they already had but were hoping wasn't real. "Daniel, that rule was created on the day you came to check on me when I was sick. When you were in this room alone." He stared at the screen. "I need you to tell me whether you did that. I need you to tell me right now." "I didn't do that," he said. But his voice, it had changed. It wasn't just denial. There was something underneath it. "Do you know who did?" And here is the moment. The moment I have replayed more times than I can count, in more moods than I knew I had. He stood in my study looking at the screenshot on my laptop, and I watched the decision move through him, the choice between the easier thing and the true thing, between the loyalty he had built his life around, and the mother standing in front of him asking him to tell her what was real. He sat down on the edge of the chair against the wall. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. "She asked me," he said. "She asked me to look up some things while you were resting. She said she wanted to get a sense of, she said it was for the plan, so we could make accurate projections." The room was very quiet. "She asked you to go into my email. She asked me to check some of the account notification emails. I didn't set up a forwarding rule. I didn't know how to do something like that. But I gave her access to the account from my phone while she was waiting in the car. I logged in and handed her the phone and he stopped. I told myself it was fine, that we were family and it wasn't a big deal. You gave her access to my email account, Mom. You gave her access to my email account. I said it again. Not loudly, not with accusation in my voice, just clearly. Just so it was in the room completely and neither of us could pretend it wasn't. Without asking me, without telling me. While I was sick in bed 20 feet away, he couldn't look at me. She set up the forwarding rule herself, he said. I didn't know she did that. I swear I didn't know. And I believed him. Again, that is the maddening part, I believed him again. Not because I was naive. Because I knew my son. And I knew the difference between a man confessing something he did and a man confessing something he allowed. And those are two very different confessions, Daniel. My voice came out low and very tired. Do you understand what she was doing? He nodded. Barely. She was building a picture. For weeks, everything she could find, the property value, the retirement estimates, the email notifications. She was assembling information she had no right to. And you helped her. Not because you're a bad person, but because she asked you to, and you didn't ask why, and you told yourself it was fine. I know, that's not good enough, I know that too. We sat in the quiet of my study, the place where Robert and I had paid bills together and planned vacations and made the ordinary decisions of a life. And I looked at my son, this man, who was in some ways who I'd always known him to be, and in some ways, a person I was seeing for the first time, and I felt two things simultaneously that I hadn't realized could coexist. I loved him completely, and I was done protecting him from the consequences of what he'd done. I'm going to talk to my attorney again tomorrow, I said. I'm going to show him the screenshot and tell him everything you just told me. And then I'm going to decide with his guidance what steps to take next. You need to understand that. Okay, and Daniel, I need you to understand something else. I am not doing this to punish you. I am doing this because no one, not you, not Samantha, not anyone who claims to love me has the right to access my financial life without my knowledge. That is not what family means. That is not what love means. And if I had not caught this, if I had not started paying attention, it would have kept going, you know that. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up and said something that surprised me. Not the words exactly, but the steadiness of them. The way they came out without hedging. She has more, he said. I went completely still. What do you mean she has more? The folder, the one she brought to dinner. There was more to it than what she showed you. She has a second version. More detailed, more. She's been working on it for longer than I told you. Months before we even bought the house, the air in the room shifted. She started working on this before you bought the house. Before we even made the offer, he looked at the floor. The house was partly the location, the size it was chosen with the assumption that you'd be moving in eventually. That your money would be part of how we managed it. I thought about the housewarming gift. The check I had written on the good paper and tucked inside the pie box with a blue ribbon. The gift I had prepared for a celebration that had already, at the time I was baking the pie, been incorporated into a financial projection. I had given $15,000 to a plan that already included everything I owned. How long has she been planning this? I asked. He lifted his eyes to mine. She started talking about it about 8 months before Robert died. The room went so quiet I could hear the clock on the bookshelf. The one Robert had bought at an antique fair in 9,987, the one with the soft tick that I had fallen asleep to for decades. 8 months before Robert died, before I was even a widow, before I was alone. When Robert was still alive and my life was still the shape it had always been, she had already been looking at me and calculating. I stood up. I walked to the window. I stood there for a moment with my back to my son, looking out at the dark yard, the garden I couldn't see but knew was there. And I made a decision, not in anger, not in grief. In the same cold, clear, level waterway I had made every decision since that night at the desk with the card statement on the screen. I turned back around. You're going to tell me everything, I said. Every conversation you remember, every detail. And then you're going to decide which side of this you're on. Because there are only two sides now, Daniel. Mine and hers, and I need to know before I walk into my attorney's office tomorrow which one I'm walking in alone. He looked at me for a long moment. And then he nodded. Yours, he said. I'm on yours. Mom, I should have been from the beginning. We talked until after midnight. And what I learned in those hours changed everything I thought I knew about how long I had been watched, how carefully I had been studied, and how much further Samantha had been willing to go than even I had understood. What Daniel told me that night across the desk in my study, with the clock ticking and the dark pressing in at the windows, took almost 4 hours to get through completely. Not because he was slow or evasive or trying to manage what I heard. He was past that. Something had broken open in him when he'd said you're some wall that had been holding back a version of events he had been carrying alone for longer than I realized. And once it cracked, it came through all at once. The way water moves when you finally stop trying to hold it back. He started from the beginning, the real beginning. Samantha had first raised the idea, he told me, during a trip they took to visit her parents in Phoenix. This was roughly 2 years before Robert died, when Robert was already sick but still moving through his days, still himself in all the ways that mattered. They had been sitting by her parents' pool after dinner, and her mother had said something offhand about estate planning the way parents do when they're getting older, and the subject becomes impossible to keep avoiding. And Samantha had gone quiet in a way Daniel described as the kind of quiet that means she's working on something. On the drive back to the hotel that night, she had brought it up for the first time, not directly. Not as a plan, as a question, the way she always started things. What do you think your mom's situation is going to look like when your dad's gone? Daniel said he'd told her not to think about that it it was morbid that his father wasn't gone yet. She had dropped it for exactly 3 weeks, and then she had raised it again, slightly differently, more practically, with numbers attached. I've been thinking about what I said in Phoenix. I just want us to be prepared. If we understand what Margaret's financial situation looks like, we can be ready to help her when the time comes. Help her, I repeated. When Daniel got to this part, that's the word she used. Every time help, his voice had a particular flatness when he said it. The flatness of someone who has finally heard a word the way it was actually meant, rather than the way he wanted it to mean. She always framed it as helping you. Over the next year and a half, the conversations continued, sporadic at first, then more frequent as Robert's health declined. Samantha researched quietly. She was always doing research. Daniel said it was one of the things he had always admired about her, the way she approached everything methodically, the way she never went into anything unprepared. He hadn't thought to ask, in those years, what exactly she was researching or why the notes she kept on her laptop were password protected in a folder he'd never been invited into. When Robert died, the conversations accelerated. She was kind to you, Daniel said. I want to be clear about that. In the weeks after Dad died, she was genuinely kind to you. She meant it. She liked you. Mom, in her way, it wasn't personal. It doesn't feel impersonal, I said. I know it doesn't. He pressed his hands together. But in her mind, those two things existed separately. She could care about you and still see your finances as a resource. That's the part I couldn't get her to hear me on. When he finally tried. I noted the word finally. When did you try? He was quiet for a moment. About 6 months before the housewarming dinner. We had a big fight about it. The first real fight we'd ever had about this. Because by then she had the full version of the folder, the real one, not the condensed version she showed you. And I sat down and read it all the way through for the first time. And he stopped. It scared me, the level of detail. The fact that she had your exact property tax records, the retirement fund projections. There was a section on what would happen to your house in probate if you died without updating your will. I felt the blood leave my face. There was a section on my will, recommendations, he said quietly, for how you might consider structuring it so that the house would transfer most efficiently. He couldn't meet my eyes. She drafted language, suggested language, for your attorney to use. The clock on the bookshelf ticked. I thought about my attorney, about the will review he'd sent over months ago, routine. He'd called it a standard update. I had made the changes myself, in consultation with him based entirely on my own wishes. But I thought now about how Samantha, with the forwarded emails and the photographed documents and 11 days of access to my account notifications, would have known when that review was in progress, would have known I was updating my will, would have been watching to see what I did with it. Daniel, I kept my voice very level, the language she drafted for my will. Did she ever share it with you? Do you have a copy of it? He thought for a moment. Then he reached for his phone. She keeps everything on a shared cloud drive. I still have access. She doesn't know I know the password to the secondary folder. He found it in less than 2 minutes. He turned the phone screen toward me. A document dated 8 months ago. 3 pages, my name in the header, specific bequest language. The house, the retirement accounts, structured in a way that I am not an attorney, but I could see well enough would have directed the largest portion of my estate directly to Daniel, and through him to their joint finances. My hands were steady. I was past the stage of hands shaking. Forward that to me, I said. Right now, and then forward it to my attorney's email. He did it while I watched. Is there more in that folder? He scrolled. There's a timeline, he said slowly. A project timeline with phases. Read it to me, he read. His voice was flat, effortful. The voice of a person reading something they are ashamed to have been adjacent to. The timeline began 2 years before Robert's death, initial research phase. He read property valuation, financial profile, and moved forward in increments. There was a phase labeled relationship building that corresponded exactly to the week Samantha had started calling me every Wednesday. There was a phase labeled proposal presentation. That was the dinner. There was a phase after that labeled, with a precision that made my breath stop, transition planning. Transition planning. The phrase for moving me out of my home was called transition planning. Stop, I said. He stopped. We sat there in the quiet. And I thought about a woman I had tried to love, had wanted to love, had made room for in my heart the way you make room for the people your children choose, sitting at her kitchen table and building a project timeline for dismantling my life. With phases, with dates, with suggested language for my will. How much of this did you know, I asked, not what you participated in. Not the email, the card. How much of the full plan did you actually know? He looked at me for a long time before he answered. More than I admitted to myself, he said. Less than I should have stopped. That answer was the most honest thing he said all evening. And in some ways it was the hardest thing to hear, because it didn't give me anywhere clean to put him. He wasn't innocent. He wasn't Samantha. He was somewhere in the complicated, uncomfortable middle, a man who had loved his wife and told himself a series of increasingly dishonest stories until the stories had become the architecture of something that had hurt his mother. I thought about what it would cost him to tell me all of this. What it would cost him to sit in my study and read me the timeline while I listened. I thought about the choice he'd made when I'd asked him which side he was on. I thought about Robert, who had always said that the measure of a person wasn't what they did wrong, but what they did when they finally understood they'd done wrong. Okay, I said, here's what happens now. He looked up. Tomorrow morning, I go to my attorney with everything you've sent me tonight. The will document, the timeline, the full folder if you can share access to it. You're going to come with me. You're going to sit in that office and tell him what you told me tonight. On the record, in his presence. Okay, and then we're going to figure out together what the appropriate next steps are. Not what I want to do in anger. Not what feels satisfying, what is actually correct. Do you understand the difference? Yes, good. I stood up. You can sleep in the guest room. It's too late for you to drive. He looked almost surprised, like he hadn't expected that. Like he'd come in here prepared to face some version of me that was colder and more finished than the one sitting across from him. Thank you, Mom. Don't thank me yet, I said. I love you. But we're not past this. We're walking through it. There's a difference, he nodded. He knew the difference. I went to bed. I didn't sleep, but I went to bed. At 6:45 in the morning, while Daniel was still in the guest room, my phone rang. Samantha, I lay there and watched it ring once, twice. 3 times I didn't answer. 30 seconds later, a text. I know Daniel came to your house last night. We need to talk before you do anything you can't take back. I read it twice. Before you do anything you can't take back. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and got up and started the coffee. By the time Daniel came downstairs, I had already called my attorney's office and confirmed a 9 o'clock appointment. I had also, and I want to be clear about this because it mattered, called my sister Barbara. Not to tell her everything, not yet, but because I had realized, sometime in the long dark hours of the night, that I had been handling all of this alone. That I had been so focused on being the woman who managed things correctly and without panic that I had not let a single person who loved me know that I was in the middle of something that was genuinely hard. Barbara answered on the first ring. She always did. Maggie. What's wrong? I hadn't been called Maggie since childhood. Something about hearing it broke something loose. I need to tell you something, I said. It's going to take a while, she said. I have all the time you need, I told her. Not everything, not the full 4-hour version, but the shape of it. The folder, the timeline. The plan that had been running for 2 years in the background of what I'd believed was ordinary family life. She didn't interrupt. She made small sounds that meant she was listening. When I finished, there was a silence, and then she said something that I wrote down afterward on the notepad by the phone. Maggie, what she did is not a reflection of who you are. It is a reflection of who she is. You were generous. You were trusting. Those are not weaknesses. Those are the things that make you worth knowing. I held the phone and breathed. What are you going to do? I'm going to my attorney this morning. Daniel is coming with me. A pause. Is he okay? He's not great, but he's doing the right thing. He's your son, Barbara said. He gets lost sometimes. He always finds his way back to you. We hung up, and I felt something shift in my chest, something small but significant. The difference between carrying a weight entirely alone and having one other person put their hand under it with you. Daniel and I drove to the attorney's office separately. I don't know why that felt important. Maybe because I needed to arrive on my own terms. Maybe because showing up in the same car would have looked, to the part of me still tallying things up, like a version of the old pattern Margaret, absorbing, accommodating, reorganizing her life around other people's needs. I arrived first. I sat in the waiting room for 4 minutes before Daniel came through the door. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked honestly, like he had aged 5 years since yesterday evening, and I felt a complicated pull of sympathy and something harder. My attorney, I'll call him Mr. Hargrove, because that's close enough, came out himself to meet us. He shook Daniel's hand without warmth but without hostility. Professional, careful. The way a good attorney greets the person sitting on the complicated side of a conversation. We sat, I laid out the documents, the screenshots, the timeline Daniel had forwarded, the will language, the email forwarding rule, and as I laid them out, one by one in the order that told the story most clearly, I watched Mr. Hargrove's expression do the thing that attorney expressions rarely do. It changed, not dramatically, but his jaw tightened slightly at the will document. His eyes went back to the timeline twice. When I finished presenting everything, he was quiet for a moment, and then he looked at Daniel. Mr. Wilson, to your knowledge, did your wife access your mother's financial accounts or documents without your mother's explicit permission? Daniel sat very straight. Yes. Did she direct you to assist in that access in any way? A pause. Yes. And the email forwarding rule, to your knowledge, was that set up by your wife using access you provided? Yes, Mr. Hargrove wrote something on his notepad. Then he looked at me. Margaret, I want to be honest with you about where's this land legally, because you deserve a clear picture. Some of what's here is very serious. The email forwarding without consent is potential unauthorized computer access that's a federal area that takes things significantly further than civil. The credit card charge is straightforward fraud, recoverable and documentable. The will language, he tapped the document. This was prepared without your knowledge or instruction, using information gathered without your consent. That speaks to intent in a way that matters. What does it mean practically? I asked. What can actually be done? It means that if you choose to pursue this, you have a documented pattern of behavior, not a single incident, not a misunderstanding, a planned, phased effort to access and redirect your financial assets. That documentation gives you significant leverage. He paused. It also means that how you proceed is a choice with real consequences in multiple directions. For your finances, for your relationship with your son, for your daughter-in-law. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at the table. Mr. Hargrove, I said, what would you do if this were your family? He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, carefully, the way attorneys say things when they are being professionally cautious but also human, I would make sure the behavior stopped completely. I would document everything so thoroughly that it could never be dismissed or minimized. And I would let the other party know in very clear terms that I had done so and that any further action would result in consequences they would not enjoy. He paused. And then I would decide from a position of complete security and full information what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted to have going forward. Not before, not while I was still in the middle of it. After, that was the right answer. It was the answer I had already arrived at somewhere between midnight and 6:45 in the morning, but hearing it from someone else in plain language, in a room with fluorescent lighting and a conference table, made it real in a different way. We spent another hour with him. He outlined specific steps. He drafted a letter, a form, documented letter, the kind that creates a legal record, notifying Samantha that the unauthorized access to my accounts and email had been discovered, documented, and that any further attempts to access my financial information would result in legal action. The letter did not threaten, it did not perform, it simply stated what was true, in language that made the truth impossible to recharacterize later. Daniel signed as a witness. I signed as myself. We drove back to my neighborhood separately. When I pulled into my driveway, Daniel was already there. Parked at the curb, he got out when he saw me. We stood on my front walk. What happens now? He asked. With Samantha and me, that's between you and her. Daniel, I can't make that decision for you. But what do you think I should? I think you have to figure out what you can live with, I said. Not what makes things easier, what you can actually look yourself in the mirror and live with. That's the only question that matters, he nodded slowly. And with us, he asked. What happens, my son? The man who had known about the folder and told himself a story, who had handed his wife access to my email and chosen not to examine why, who had also driven 40 minutes at my request, walked into an attorney's office, and told the truth on the record when the truth cost him something real. We take it one day at a time, I said. That's all I've got right now. One day at a time, he nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. He got back in his car. He sat there for a moment. Then he drove away. I went inside. I stood in my kitchen. I put the kettle on. I stood at the counter and waited for the water to boil and thought about everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks, from the folder on the dinner table to the letter now sitting in my attorney's files, waiting to be sent. And then my phone rang. Not Daniel, not Barbara, not my attorney, Samantha. I stood there looking at the screen. The kettle started to whistle. I turned the burner off. I set the kettle aside. I picked up the phone and I answered. I know you went to an attorney, she said immediately. No preamble, no warmth. The performance was gone. I know Daniel told you everything. I know about the letter. Then you know where things stand, Margaret. Her voice shifted. Not back to warmth, she was past pretending at warmth. Into something else. something harder and more honest and, in its way, almost more interesting. You are making a mistake. I put months of work into a plan that would have been good for this entire family. You would have been taken care of. You would have been close to your son. You would have had people around you instead of sitting alone in that house every night. I was trying to solve a real problem, with my money, I said, with my house, with my assets that you accessed without my permission and incorporated into a plan without my knowledge. Because if I had asked you first, you would have said no. The silence that followed that sentence was something I will remember for the rest of my life. Because she was right. If she had come to me at any point before the research, before the timeline, before the folder and said, "Margaret, can I talk to you about your finances and whether you'd consider restructuring them for the benefit of the family?" I would have said no, clearly, immediately, without ambiguity. She knew that. She had always known that. And so she had decided that what I would have chosen, if asked, was less important than the outcome she had determined was correct. "Samantha," I said, "you just told me that you didn't ask because you already knew what I'd say. Do you understand what that means?" "Nothing. It means you knew you were doing something I wouldn't consent to. And you did it anyway. And you built a plan around doing it anyway. That's not problem solving. That's not caring about me. That's deciding that what you wanted was more important than what I wanted with my own life." The line was quiet for a long time. "The letter is being sent," I said. "My accounts are protected. My home is protected. My will is exactly what I want it to be. Written by my attorney, reflecting my wishes and nobody else's. If there is any further attempt to access my financial information or to involve my son in anything related to my finances without my direct knowledge and consent, I will pursue every legal option available to me. Do you understand?" A pause. "I understand," she said. Her voice in those two words had something in it I had not heard before. Not remorse, exactly, but the particular deflation of someone who has run a plan all the way to its end and found the door locked. "I hope," I said, "that some part of you eventually understands why this was wrong. Not the practical reasons, the real reason, because you looked at a person who loved you and treated her like an asset. And that is something you have to decide what to do with." I hung up. The kettle was still warm. I made my tea. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had sat at 2:30 in the morning with a credit card statement on my screen and the cold clarity of understanding settling into my bones. A lot had happened since that night, and I was still here, in my home with my tea, with my life exactly where it belonged. The sun was coming through the kitchen window the way it always did at this hour, falling across the floor in the long particular way that I had always loved about this room. Robert and I had argued gently about this window when we were building the house. He wanted it smaller. I wanted it larger, and I had won, and every morning the light came through it like I had planned for it to, like I had known exactly what I was asking for. I sat in that light and I breathed, and I let myself feel for the first time in weeks, not the anger or the grief or the cold purposeful clarity that had been carrying me through, but something underneath all of it. Something quieter, something that felt surprisingly like the beginning of peace. The beginning of peace, I learned, does not feel the way you expect it to. I had imagined in the abstract way you imagine things before you actually live them, that when something hard was finally over, you would feel it. A before and an after, separated by something you could point to and say, "There, that was the moment it changed." But life doesn't work that way. Life moves the way water moves, continuous, patient, filling in around the edges of things, and by the time you notice that something has shifted, it has already been shifting for longer than you realized. The letter went out from my attorney's office on a Thursday. I know because I had asked Patricia to confirm when it was received, and she called me at 11:15 that morning to say that Samantha had signed for it. I put the phone down and went into my garden, not because the garden needed anything in particular, because I needed somewhere to put my hands. I pulled weeds for 45 minutes. The mindless, satisfying work of it, the resistance as a root gives way, the smell of the turned earth, the way you can look back at the section you've cleared and see something tangible that you did. Robert had never understood gardening. He'd been patient about it, supportive in the way that good husbands are supportive of things they find baffling, but he had genuinely never understood why I spent so much time with my hands in the dirt when there were perfectly good vegetables available at the grocery store. I had always told him, it's not about the vegetables. Standing in my garden on that Thursday morning, I finally had the words for what it actually was about. It was about the only place in my life where the outcome was entirely, peacefully my own, what I planted, what I watered, what grew, nobody else's plan, nobody else's projection, nobody else's assessment of how my resources could be better utilized. Mine. I came inside, washed my hands, made a sandwich, and sat at the kitchen table, the same chair I'd been sitting in through all of this, and I noticed that for the first time in weeks when I sat down, My shoulders didn't come up toward my ears, my jaw wasn't tight. I was just sitting eating my sandwich, present in my own kitchen on a Thursday afternoon. It was such a small thing, and it felt enormous. I was still sitting there when Daniel called. "She got the letter," he said. "I know, my attorney confirmed. She's not okay." Mom, a pause. "I mean, she's not going to do anything. But she's not okay." I had thought carefully about how I would feel when this moment came. I had expected to feel something hard satisfaction, maybe, or the particular relief of a threat finally, formally neutralized. What I actually felt was something more complicated, something that sat closer to sadness than I wanted to admit. "Is she upset?" I asked. "She's angry. She says you've destroyed the family." He paused. "She says a lot of things. What do you say?" A long silence. Long enough that I was about to ask again. "I say she made choices," he said finally. "And choices have outcomes, and this is the outcome of hers. Are you two going to be okay?" The question cost me something to ask. Not because I didn't want to know, but because the answer, whatever it was going to require me to feel something about a woman I was still actively furious at, and I wasn't entirely ready for that. "I don't know," Daniel said. "I genuinely don't know where we're talking or trying to. She thinks I betrayed her by coming to you. I think I was 5 years too late doing the right thing. Both of those things can be true at the same time," I said. "Yeah," he was quiet again. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, do you hate her?" I thought about it. Really thought about it the way the question deserved. I thought about Samantha researching my property value 8 months before my husband died. I thought about the Wednesday calls, the warm interest, the questions wrapped in concern. I thought about her standing in my doorway saying, "We're family. We should have access." I thought about the project timeline with its phases and its dates and its suggested language for my will. And then I thought about her voice on the phone that last call. The deflation in those 2 words I understand. The particular sound of someone who has run all the way to the end of a plan and found nothing there. "No," I said, "I don't hate her. How is that possible?" "Because hating someone takes energy I need for other things. And because I think somewhere underneath all of it, she believed she was right. She believed the plan was good. She convinced herself that what she wanted and what was best for everyone were the same thing, and she never let herself look too closely at the difference." I paused. "That's not something I hate. That's something I feel sorry for." Daniel was quiet on the other end of the line. "I'm not saying what she did was acceptable," I said. "It wasn't. It was a serious violation, and I'm treating it as such. But I can hold both things. I can protect myself from her and still feel some compassion for what it must be like to be her right now." "You're a better person than I am," he said. "I'm just older," I said. "Give it time." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Small and tired but real, we talked for a while longer. About logistics, about what came next. Practically, he was going to stay in the house for now. They were going to try counseling. Nothing was decided. I listened without offering opinions he hadn't asked for. That was new for me. Not every conversation needs the mother's perspective. Some conversations need the mother to just be there, breathing on the other end of the line, present without pushing. When we hung up, I sat for a while, then I called Barbara. She answered the same way she always did, "Maggie." "How are you?" "Better," I said. "Actually better. Tell me." So I told her. The letter, the phone call with Daniel, the garden that morning, the sandwich I'd eaten without my jaw being tight. She laughed at the sandwich part, not because it was funny, but because she understood exactly what I meant by it. Barbara has known me for 67 years. She doesn't need everything explained. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "Going forward, live my life," I said. "The same life I was living before any of this started. In my house, with my garden, with my finances exactly as I've them. And Daniel? One day at a time." That's what I told him, and I meant it. "And Samantha?" I thought about that. "She's my son's wife. Whatever happens between them is between them. If she's in his life, she's going to be in mine to some degree, and I'll handle that with whatever grace I can manage when the time comes. But she will never again have access to my home, my finances, or my trust. That part is done." Barbara was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm proud of you for what? For not falling apart. For not going small. For fighting yourself when a lot of women your age, a lot of women any age would have just let it happen because fighting felt like too much." I thought about that word. Fighting. I hadn't thought of it as fighting. I thought of it as paying attention, seeing what was in front of me, doing what was correct in the order it needed to be done. But maybe Barbara was right. Maybe those are the same things sometimes. "Thank you," I said, "for answering when I called Maggie," she said. "You never even have to ask." 3 weeks passed. They pass the way good weeks pass when you're not in the middle of a crisis, without your particularly noticing them. One day giving way quietly to the next, the routines of your life filling in around the space where the emergency had been. I went to church. I had coffee with Ruth. I finished the book I'd been meaning to read for months and started another. I made soup from scratch on a Tuesday afternoon just because the weather had turned and it felt like the right thing to do. I also did something I hadn't expected to do. I joined a group. Not a support group exactly, I'm not sure that's the right word for it. A women's discussion group that met Thursday evenings at the community center, organized by a woman named Gloria who had lost her husband 4 years ago and had, in the absence of her primary companionship, decided to build a different kind of companionship from scratch. 7 women ranging in age from 58 to 74. We talked about whatever needed talking about. I hadn't said anything specific about my situation in the first 2 meetings. I'd listened, mostly, gotten a feel for the room. These were women who had lived real lives, not performing resilience, not presenting curated versions of difficulty, but actually sitting with the hard things and looking at them together. On the 3rd Thursday, Gloria looked at me near the end of the evening and said, simply, Margaret, you've been listening a lot, what are you carrying? And I told them, not everything. I gave them the shape of it, the outline. But enough that when I finished, the room was very quiet, and then a woman named Helen, 72 years old with short gray hair and the directest eyes I'd ever seen on a person, said, what did you do about it? So I told them that too. When I finished, Helen looked at me for a long moment. Good, she said, just that good, but the way she said it felt like a standing ovation. Gloria said, I want to ask you something and tell me if it's too personal. Are you angry still? I thought about it honestly. Yes, I said, some days. There are mornings when I think about that folder and the timeline and the section about my will, and I feel it real hot anger. I let myself feel it. And then I get up and I water my plants, and I make my coffee and I move through the day. That's exactly right, Gloria said. That's exactly how it works. I drove home from that Thursday feeling something I hadn't expected. Lighter, not because anything had been resolved or fixed or made neat, but because I had said real things to real people who had heard them without flinching, and that turned out to be worth more than I had known to look for. The call I wasn't expecting came on a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the letter. Not Daniel, not Barbara, not my attorney, it was Samantha. I stared at the screen for so long that the call almost went to voicemail, and then for the second time, the same impulse that had made me answer before, that particular combination of stubbornness and curiosity, I picked up. Margaret, her voice was different. I noticed it immediately. The composure was still there. Samantha would probably have composure in the middle of an earthquake, but the precision was different. Less controlled. Like she had rehearsed something and then at the last second abandoned the script. Samantha, I'm not calling to argue. I'm not calling to ask for anything. A pause. I'm calling because I've been in counseling for the past month, and my therapist keeps asking me to think about the conversations I'm avoiding. And this is the one I keep. She stopped. I'm not calling for you. I'm calling because I'm supposed to. That surprised me. Genuinely. Okay, I said, I want to say that what I did was wrong. The words came out measured, deliberate, like she was reading from something internal. Not a performance, something more like someone who has practiced saying a true thing until they can say it without their defenses blocking it. Not wrong because it didn't work. Wrong because it treated you like a problem to be solved. And you're not a problem, you're a person, and I knew that. I put it in a box where it wouldn't interfere with the plan. The room was very quiet. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I don't think I've earned that, and I'm not sure I ever will. I'm just saying it, so it's been said. I held the phone for a moment. There is a version of me, the version from before Robert died, maybe, or the version from before the folder, from the years when I still arranged everything around, making other people comfortable, that would have rushed to fill the silence. That would have said, I appreciate that, or it means a lot, or found some way to make the moment easier for her. That version of me had spent a lifetime smoothing things over, absorbing discomfort, being the woman who made it okay. That version was still there. I could feel her, she hadn't gone anywhere. But she wasn't the only version anymore. I hear you, I said, and I'm glad you're in counseling. Silence, that's all you're going to say? That's what I have right now. Samantha, that's honest. You said something true and I heard it, and I'm glad you're working on understanding it. I don't have more than that today. Another pause. And then something unexpected. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I said. And I surprised myself by saying it. I don't think you're an evil person. I think you're a person who decided that what she wanted mattered more than what I had chosen. And that's something you have to live with. But it doesn't make you evil. I could hear her breathing. Thank you, she said quietly. The quietest I had ever heard her. Take care of yourself, I said. We hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time, trying to figure out what I felt. Because it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't the closing chord of something that had been building toward resolution. It was more complicated than that. It was the feeling of something that remained unfinished and might always remain unfinished, and finding that you could live inside that incompleteness without it defining you. Some things don't wrap up neatly. Some things just become part of the landscape of a life. You learn to walk around them. They stop being the whole view and become just part of the terrain. I went outside, I sat in my garden. It was a good morning, the kind that October sometimes gives you as a gift, warm enough to sit without a jacket if you find the right spot, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more itself than usual. My tomatoes were done for the year, but I had late-season mums in the pots along the fence, deep red and bright orange, the colors Robert had always liked best. I sat there with my coffee and I talked to him. I do that sometimes. Not in a way I try to explain to people, because I'm not sure I can explain it, not prayer exactly, not delusion, just the particular comfort of directing your thoughts towards someone you loved so completely that they became, over 41 years, part of the way you think, part of the internal landscape, the voice in the back of your mind that asks the questions you're avoiding and tells you the truth you're not quite ready to hear. I told him about the folder, about the timeline, about the phone calls and the email and the credit card and the locked cabinet and the attorney and the letter. I told him about Daniel sitting at the kitchen table with both hands around the coffee cup, looking young and tired and ashamed, and also, finally, honest. I told him about Samantha's call this morning and what I'd said and what she'd said and the silence between all of it. And then I sat quietly for a while, the way you do, when you've said what you need to say and you're waiting for the part of yourself that knows things to catch up with the part that's still sorting them out. What came back to me, not as a voice, not as anything external, but as the quiet settling of something true, was this: I had not been broken by any of it, that was the thing. After everything, the planning that had run for 2 years behind my back, the access taken without permission, the financial life that had been studied and cataloged and incorporated into someone else's future, without my knowledge, after all of it, I was still here in my garden drinking my coffee, in my home that I had paid for and protected and kept, in the same house where Robert and I had raised a son and argued about window sizes and made the ordinary, essential, irreplaceable decisions of a shared life. They had tried to move me out of it, literally, specifically, with phases and timelines and projected dates. They had planned to transition me out of my own life. And I was still here. I thought about the women in Gloria's Thursday group. About Helen with her short gray hair saying good like it was the only word the moment needed. About Barbara answering on the first ring. About Patricia at the bank reading my face and standing up from her desk before I'd even reached the counter. About my nephew talking me through the technical questions in a voice that was careful and patient and never once made me feel foolish for not already knowing the answers. All these people who had been there not because I had performed strength convincingly enough to earn their presence, but because I had finally, after too many years of managing everything alone, let them in. That was the thing I had done wrong, not the gift, not the trust, not the generosity that Samantha had characterized as naivety and that I refused to characterize as anything other than what it was: love, freely given without agenda. Those things were not mistakes. The mistake was smaller and more forgivable than that. It was believing that being strong meant being solitary. That asking for help was the same as admitting defeat. That a woman who managed everything alone was more formidable than a woman who knew who she could call. I know better now. 2 months after the letter, something happened that I had not planned for and could not have predicted. Daniel showed up on a Sunday afternoon alone, no call ahead. Just his car in the driveway and a knock at the door. The way he always knocked now, like he understood that my door was mine to open or not open. And the choice was entirely at my discretion. I opened it. He was holding a bag, groceries, specifically the ingredients for Robert's mother's apple pie. He stood on my porch and looked at me and said, "I want to learn how to make it. If you'll teach me." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the boy I had packed lunches for and driven to soccer and stayed up all night with when he had fever. I thought about the man who had sat in an attorney's office and told the truth on the record when it cost him something real. I thought about all the distance between those two people and all the things that had happened in the space between them. "Come in," I said. We spent 3 hours in my kitchen. He was bad at the lattice crust. He kept tearing it, and I kept showing him again, and he kept getting frustrated in the way that adults get frustrated when they are bad at something they have decided to be good at. Twice he almost gave up. Both times I handed him another strip of dough and said, "Try again." At some point in the middle of our second attempt at the crust, he said, not looking at me, looking at the dough, "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it, not just the card, not just the email, for the years of telling myself it was fine when it wasn't, for not protecting you when I should have." I kept my hands on the dough. "I know," I said. "Is that enough? Is sorry enough?" "Not by itself," I said. "Sorry is the beginning. What comes after is the thing that matters." He nodded. He went back to the crust. We burned the first pie a little, slightly more than slightly, if I'm honest, and we argued mildly about whether it counted as a pie or a very expensive cooking lesson, And he said it still tasted fine, and I said that was because the filling covered a multitude of sins, and he laughed. A real laugh, the bright, uncomplicated one from the phone call when they'd gotten the house. I hadn't heard that laugh in a while. I had missed it more than I'd let myself admit. We ate burnt apple pie at my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, and we talked about ordinary things, his work, my garden, a book I'd been reading, a neighbor's new dog that had been disrupting the street's morning quiet. We talked the way people talk when they are rebuilding something, carefully, laying one plank at a time, not rushing toward the finished bridge, but trusting that if you keep going, it will eventually hold weight again. After he left, I washed the dishes and put the kitchen back in order and went to my desk. I sat down, I thought about everything I wanted to say, and then I took out the good cream-colored stationery, the same stationery I'd used for the letter that went in the pie box with the check and the blue ribbon, the letter that started all of this, and I wrote, not to Daniel, not to anyone who had been part of this story. I wrote to myself, the way Robert used to write in the journal he kept for years, the journal I'd found after died and read through with my heart in my throat because it was so completely and unmistakably him. He'd always said it helped him understand what he actually thought, as opposed to what he told himself he thought. The journal was where the truth lived. I wrote what I had learned. I wrote that generosity is not a flaw, that trust is not stupidity, that a woman who gives with an open hand and a full heart has not made a mistake just because someone else chose to take advantage of it. The mistake belongs to the person who takes, not the person who gives. I wrote that being alone is not the same as being unprotected, and being protected is not the same as surrendering your independence to people who have decided, for reasons of their own, that they know better than you how your life should be arranged. I wrote that the people who love you will show you, not in grand declarations but in small consistent choices, answering on the first ring, standing up from a desk when they read your face, handing you another strip of dough and saying try again. I wrote that the strongest word in the English language is still the one I said at a dinner table with a folder in front of me and a plan I hadn't consented to laid out like a verdict. No one syllable, no apology, no softening, no management of anyone else's comfort at the expense of my own clarity. No, it had cost me something to say it. It had cost Daniel something to hear the things that came after. It had cost Samantha the plan she had spent 2 years building. It had cost all of us the comfortable fiction that everything was fine and everyone was who they appeared to be. But here is what it had not cost me: my home, my finances, my independence, my sense of who I was and what I deserved. My relationship with my son damaged, yes, but alive and working, and slowly becoming something more honest than it had been before. My peace, my garden, my burnt apple pie on a Sunday afternoon, my coffee in the morning light, my ability to sit at my own kitchen table in my own house with my own hands around my own cup and know that everything around me was exactly and only mine. I folded the letter. I put it in an envelope. I put the envelope in the desk drawer where I keep the things that matter. Then I went outside. The evening was coming in soft and orange, the particular light of October, doing the thing it always does, making everything look like something you want to keep. I stood in my garden for a while. I looked at the mums Robert would have liked. I looked at the fence and the yard and the house behind me, the house with the window I had argued for and won, the house we had built together and that I had kept alone, and that was mine in every way a thing can be mine. And I thought, this is enough, not as resignation, not as settling, as genuine, clear-eyed, hard-won recognition that the life I had built, the life that someone had tried to dismantle and map and redistribute without my knowledge or consent, was good, was enough, was exactly, precisely, stubbornly, beautifully enough. I was 67 years old. I was a widow. I was a mother navigating the complicated territory of a relationship that had been broken and was slowly, imperfectly being rebuilt. I was a woman who had discovered, in the hardest possible way, that the people we love most are not always the people who are safest with what we entrust them. And I was still standing in my garden in the October light, on my own terms. Some people will tell you that the lesson in a story like this is about money: protect your accounts, change your passwords, trust no one with access to your financial life. And yes, all of that, every single word of that, but the deeper lesson, the one that lives underneath the practical ones, is this: your life belongs to you, not to the people who love you, not to the people who claim to love you, not to the people who have decided, with the best or worst intentions in the world, that they know what's good for you better than you do. Your life, your home, your savings, your choices, your future, your daily cup of coffee in the morning light belongs entirely, exclusively, non-negotiably to you, and anyone who tries to take that from you, however they dress it up, however warmly they frame it, however many times they use the word family to make it sound like love you, have not only the right but the absolute responsibility to look them in the eyes and say the word that ends the conversation. No, say it clearly, say it without apology. Say it knowing that it is not the end of anything that was worth keeping. Because the things that are worth keeping, the real things, the solid things, the things built on honesty and actual respect will still be there on the other side of it. I promise you that. I am living proof.